What's up, the internet? It's Kyle. We're back here on the EXP Expo 2022, the one with all the twos. This is our 9th day, if you're counting, of the EXP Expo 2022. It's the longest convention I've ever done, and it just keeps getting better. And our next panel is really, in my opinion, the panel I'm most excited for. This is our retailer roundtable panel. So we've got Joshua Starnes of Red 5 Comics, Travis McIntire from Source Point Press, Charlie Stickney from Scout, and Dinesh Shamdasani from Bad Idea.
Perfect. That was a perfect pronunciation.
I went slow to make sure because 9 days in and I'm having trouble pronouncing my own name. So I'm going to let Joshua, you lead a retailer panel every year at San Diego Comic-Con, right?
Yeah.
Not retailer, publisher panel.
Publisher. Yeah.
So I'm going to let you take the lead and I'm going to just sit here and absorb the knowledge.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah, I've had the fortune to have to do an indie publisher panel at the virtual con with a couple of the guys who are on this in the last couple of years and hopefully this year as well. And because it's virtual, we never really get to do a Q&A. And I keep getting a question afterwards, both years, that I wish I would kind of addressed during the panel, which was, how is life as an indie publisher different from 2019 to now? What did the pandemic in 2020 change the most for the business from the indie point of view?
Are you asking us?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the question. I have my own idea, but I'm interested in or like my own experience. But I'm interested in what it was like for some of my peers here. What it was like for you guys.
What do you think, guys?
Well, I'll start and I'll say, I mean, it was really exciting. Just in the sense that I think because of the pandemic, because of distribution being disrupted, it gave all of us a chance to kind of rethink things. And I think if you're a gigantic corporation, it's really hard to pivot quickly and try new things. And I know at least for us at Scout, we were the perfect size to kind of take advantage of that and say, okay, you know what? Diamond shut down. We're going to self-distribute. We're going to reach out to Lunar. We're going to do lots of different things. We're going to start a sub box. And it was, I think, a way to directly connect with fans, a time to connect with fans and build an audience. So, for us, even though it was very difficult, it was an opportunity. And, so I'm not saying I'm grateful to the pandemic, but I think anytime that something comes along that gives industry pause, it's time to reevaluate and see if there's a better way forward to do some things.
I thought Scout did a great job. Actually, watching from Bad Idea standpoint, watching what you guys were doing, it was interesting to see how quickly you guys are moving. For us, it was a little different, I think, than a lot of publishers because we're insane and we weren't really doing the traditional thing. So it was kind of Bad Idea business as usual. It was fun in that regard. The difference, I will say, having worked at Valiant before, because of COVID, because of remote working, it just meant drinking alone more, washing away the day of publishing by yourself.
Right.
I think for us, from a financial perspective, we built the company, and I think we were always known for being very, very strong with live events.
Right.
And so, our convention game was, probably 50 to 60% of our annual, revenue. So if you go back to the very beginning, after that C2E2 at the very end of February, beginning of March, which was sort of like the last major show that happened before everything sort of shut down. I mean, I think for us, it was a hit. There was definitely about 2 months where there was a real, like, okay, we've survived the last 8 years, but this might finally, this could potentially be finally the thing that does it. But we also, we've coming from sort of the indie background and, kind of like a touring rock band kind of background, we control so much of everything we do, like I own the warehouse. I own all our we have everything. We have all of our stuff, right? We have all of our product. We have all this stuff. So we kind of took the last of our investable cash and just built an e-commerce brand. That by that April we were up and running, and by May we had kind of replaced the convention revenue. And ultimately, I think one of the things that makes the Oxeye family, which is SourcePoint, Deepwater Games, and Entry Art Design, is that we have, outside of just books and comics, we're also a tabletop game company. And those things I think worked really well in tandem with each other as we were kind of moved into the e-commerce, and then having the ability to ship everything ourselves on site and not have to depend on any outside warehousing or other shippers. We just controlled everything ourselves. So it was certainly interesting, but ultimately it worked out, and I think it made us a lot more careful. I think I think previously to that we existed with a certain amount of laissez-faire attitude about the company and about publishing, because we would always kind of look at things and be like, to be frank, we didn't, for years, we didn't care what the diamond numbers on a book was. We didn't care. Like, if we thought it was cool, we would sell it anyway. Like, I'll hand sell it over the next 3 months, no problem. Like, every book is a sellout. That's the way we do it. And we had kind of gotten to the point where we were able to just sort of like muscle through any problem or any like lack of organization, or maybe just the fact that we're all goons. But I think it made us a lot more disciplined. I think it made us a lot more disciplined. It made us grow up pretty quickly and start taking it into account that, like, okay, if we can't have live events, which was our major strength, like, what are we going to do? Are we going to die, or are we going to adjust? And luckily we were able to adjust.
I think on the Red 5 side, like, our experience was very much similar to that. It was going from being very, very diamond dependent and retailer dependent, and still very much still are. But when you have like 6 or 8 months where that basically doesn't exist, and you realize you have to pivot to being some sort of direct to reader, direct to consumer, and it can't just be. It's going to have to be multiple different levels, and you can't be revenue dependent on just one thing, because that can go away. In a heartbeat, so much faster than you really realize it can until it's gone. And then trying to make sense, and I guess this kind of pivots into the other question we get, is trying to make sense of what the new post 2020 world is, especially with what could be a leveling of the distribution field, definitely a changing of the distribution part of the game from a lot of direct distribution from publishers and to multiple distributors within the U.S., which as publishers, I've heard it being talked about for at least 10 years. Like, we need another distributor where we can't just be locked into a monopoly. And now that's here, and it goes from being like a theoretical to something that you have to deal with trying to bring back the subscription model for a publisher, which for a long time I really didn't think was workable anymore. But kind of watching the way Scout led the way with a lot of like the subscription boxes was really interesting. And I always tell James, like, I kind of watch what they do so I can steal from you shamelessly and and repeat a lot of your ideas. But what's it been like for you as you look forward to the changes that will wrought by 2020 and the kind of the new space we're in? Where do you see especially indie publishing going?
Well, I mean, like, I think what you're just saying about the subscription box is a good example of going direct to the consumer. And I think that is something that we all, if you have the infrastructure to do, should be looking into. You never want to cut out your retail partners.
Right.
And we always offer everything that we're doing to the retailers so they can partake in it. And I'm totally fine with anyone stealing anything that we come up with if it makes their company stronger, because I think it's important that we have, strong companies out there that are pushing each other, coming up with good ideas that we can help push the market forward. Because in some ways it had been a stagnant beast that was doing everything one way. And I love, Dinesh, that you guys come up with a lot of crazy ideas, and some things people love and some things people hate, but
Yeah.
at least you're trying, you know? And the same thing, Travis, like you guys are doing killer things in terms of your direct distribution, through, you know, through Oxide Media. Like I am really impressed with how hard you guys are working and out there in your convention game. You're totally right. Like I was blown away, you know, especially as like I came from the creator side, you know, back around 2016, and I was looking at different companies and seeing what they were doing, and I was blown away with what, you know, what you guys were doing. And Josh, I think you and I actually met at San Diego around 2016.
You did. I found in a
Yeah.
box like the other week, like an old White Ash preview comic that you gave me that I had completely forgotten you gave me.
If you still have
"Hey,
that, that was
still
one
have
of
it."
1
All right, I'm putting that in, I'm
25.
putting that in the case
Ash
somewhere. I still,
Yeah, you
I
should.
found it the other day.
But you know, like I really think it's an interesting time, and making sure you have a way to get direct to the consumers is great. For me, the biggest concern that I have about 2022 is paper.
Yeah.
And making sure that any of these initiatives that we're doing, we can fulfill. Because just talking to the printers, it's such a nightmare. And making sure we can deliver on time, and making sure the retailers understand, you know, we're doing everything we can to get you product, but sometimes, you know, these printers just don't have the paper to print it. So like I think that is going to be the overall biggest factor in terms of how 2022 goes is the paper supply.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I probably not to put too fine a point on it, but production in general right now is a nightmare. It's awful. So I don't know for sure, but potentially we deal with more factories and print companies than most small publishers, because we do the games, we do like e-gaming accessories, we do plush toy. I mean, we do so much different types of products under all the different umbrellas. So on any given week, we're working with Taiwan, South Korea, China, Canada, United States, and shipping and printing right now is bad. I mean, I've been doing this a little over 10 years, and it's as bad as it's ever been in terms of like getting stuff in and getting it in on time and getting it through ports. It's kind of, I think it's wildly inconvenient that we've sort of come through this pandemic and the shutdown of traditional distribution, and then it coming back. And then for the first time, maybe ever, the direct market is suddenly open. Like there, you know, I mean, I was there going to shows for years, talking to retailers one-on-one, trying to get them to buy direct. They never want to, you know, they're like, nah, I got to order from the catalog. That's all they ever want to do. Well, now that's different. A lot of retailers are much more flexible. They want to do things differently. Like we have a very robust direct to retailer distribution, and Diamond and Simon & Schuster and all those things. And all that's happening. And now everything is supply chain. So it's pretty crazy. I think that's probably my number one concern. It's certainly my number one headache. I mean, and it's difficult. It's difficult to budget for. It's difficult to predict, you know, and you're trying to make the customer happy. You're trying to make the retailers happy, and creators too, you know, like we have all these books, and we're trying to tell creators when their books are going to come out, because creators are passionate about their stuff and they want to set up signings, they want to do all this stuff. And we just like 3 days ago had to announce that, like, hey, our January, you know, the last 2 Wednesdays of the month where we usually release, they're both going to be 2 weeks off. Yep. And there was, you know, nothing had changed in terms of when we put our orders in or anything from any previous month. They just got delayed because there was no paper, you know, and it's a weird time.
How are you dealing with? That's fascinating, Travis. How are you dealing with projecting out how far this is going to go? It's hard for me to answer this question because A Bad Idea we're over, so we're not publishing. So I mean, thankfully we've just got a couple books that are stragglers from last year that had a paper issue. But I'm very curious to hear from you guys how you're projecting how far this is going to go out, and what do you do to handle that? Do you shift to other product?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it like another thing you're dealing with right now. So, you know, we're looking, so when you look at games, like game publishing, you know, right now we're trying to get our, you know, May, June, July games into production. And it's this mad rush to try to get them into production before the Chinese New Year hits, which essentially like shuts down all of Asia. which is for 2 weeks, which is a lot of, I mean, that's where you go if you want telescoping boxes or things. That's where you have those things produced. So we're kind of in a mad production rush to try to get a lot of that stuff done. And get all those things as set up as we can. I think that if you kind of went back to maybe 2019, if you went all the way back to 2019, we probably had a full like year to 18 months of like very strict like production schedule. We knew exactly when things are going to go. And I think that right now, we are probably as loosey-goosey as we've ever been, like almost enough to where I'm a little uncomfortable with it. Only because comics, I think, are a lot more forgiving, honestly, than the gaming community is and gaming distribution is.
Really?
In my opinion, I guess, it just seems like there's less of an outcry if we're late with the comics than there is when we miss the street date for a game. So I don't know. We haven't announced a ton of dates because there's so much up in the air with where things are going to go. Now, I have talked to like paper suppliers, like the actual factories that make paper, and they tell me like, yeah, there isn't actually like a material shortage. There's tons of paper. Like that's not the problem. The problem is that the freight costs. So like a container on a ship, the freight cost of that is so high that the margin on shipping a paper, which is a low margin commodity, isn't enough for them to ship enough. Like they can't compete with the, I don't know, Apple iPhones, which are, a 600% margin to go onto a container ship.
Wow.
So it's strange. I don't know. I mean, for us, we're just trying to we're trying to be more flexible, particularly with our game street dates. For comics, I think the biggest change we made is we took 3 months worth of like trades and prose novels and took them off of our schedule to try to buy some extra time in there. So essentially it's going to come into like March, April, May. I think we won't release any of the larger books, only because we fell into this like serpent eating its own tail cycle of, 3 months ago, one got 2 weeks late, and now the next one is 3 weeks late, and now the next one is 4 weeks late. It's just like piling up and piling up and piling up. So pretty soon, and on top of that, you can get so over your skis with the money that you spent, because you have nets on when you're going to receive the payment on. It just turns into such a nightmare. So we made some adjustments, and a lot of it is just trying not to be very flexible with the release dates and actually try to figure out when and how things are going to ship, because freight comes into all this too, not just like printing supplies. You start looking at freight. I mean, luckily we do so much in Canada, it's not too bad, but as soon as you start dealing with Taiwan or South Korea or China, now you're talking about a boat.
Yeah.
And it used to be like, yeah, you could set your watch by it, it'd be 22 days like bang, no problem. Now, I mean, we have a book that we did with Tony Schiavone, Butts and Seats. We did a Kickstarter for it last year, a nice hardcover for the Kickstarter. I mean, we went to print on that 6 months ago and printed it, and they're still not here. They spent 6 weeks sitting outside of Los Angeles, and now they're somewhere between there and our warehouse, right? So that was supposed to hit shelves initially. So it would be a bookstore release. So it was supposed to come out Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And so now we're in like the third week of January and it's still not out. So just like that's how that book isn't so bad because there's a Kickstarter associated with it, right? So we're not financially, we're okay with it, but that's all kind of like already paid for, which is nice. But other books, that isn't the case. Traditional releases, that isn't the case. So we've kind of had to okay, we need to clear the schedule. We need to slow this down a little bit, and hopefully things start to catch up. That's where we're at.
And I think it goes back to, what we were talking about earlier is diversifying, right? If you're used to just having one printer who's your go-to, you can't have it just be one printer. And we've printed domestically for a while because we had a great hookup for a printer here in the United States, which takes away that port time. You're sitting waiting for books to come in.
Yeah, I think we actually use that printer sometimes. The one, I don't know if you're still there, but the one you used to use, the domestic one, I think we actually use that one sometimes now. Because now we're calling to find who can do it.
And what you got to do. And so we've been on, had a lot of meetings with a lot of printers lately. And even some of the biggest ones that handle, if you can imagine, bigger publishers than us, like there actually are a couple, but and so talking to these people, and you can tell that they're a little wary about bringing on new clients at this point.
Mhm.
And they're like, hey, tell us what your load is, that can you give us a schedule for 4 months and we can tell you if we can slot you in. Turnaround time used to be 4 weeks on a trade. We're looking for 4 months now. A hardcover is 9 months, versus like, so it's just something that you need to sort of be considering going into it. And you just have to have your schedule planned out a lot more in advance. Now for us, we got hit really hard because we thought we had a supply that dried up, right, with a printer. So we are going to have a dry month, which is January right now, which we're not having a lot of books come out. So we're going to be catching up as we go forward. But in the interim, I think it's about, as a publisher, thinking, what else can you sell? And that's where you come back to the direct-to-consumer model, where, at least for us, we have a large backstock that we can sell directly to consumers. And it's a good time to introduce people to some of the rest of your line. If you have a series that's coming back for volume 2, here's a time to pitch them volume 1. Running deals to get people interested in the product. I think from a retailer perspective, try to be in contact as much with the publishers so they can say to you, hey, look, we want to get you these things, but this is when the new dates seem to be. We'll keep you updated as soon as we know. But we're all in this together, and it's a crazy system right now in terms of trying to figure out production deadlines and dates and shipping.
Yeah. So one thing we've been looking at and thinking about is what changes, like definitely more direct to consumer, moving into merchandise, moving into something that can be produced locally so you can have it available. But that's sort of like a stopgap. But are there long range? There's lots of questions about how long supply disruptions will be. There's some forecasts saying maybe we'll be back into something like regular order, at least for shipping by the midsummer. But they were saying that last year, so you can expect maybe it could easily go into 2023, and there's still a lot of unknowns about it. Do you start making major changes to, or considering major changes to line production? The monthly model was kind of broken a long time ago, and we moved into this series of mini series. So your monthly model now is it's more like semi-monthly. Do we look at breaking that more and moving into something like focus on book production, where I can schedule a long way out, and I can start printing a book now that I intend to have here next year, and have somewhat more control that it's going to be here. But then that's one book. It hits cash flow. It's not great for retailers. Retailers maybe are not wanting to carry it, and the book market itself may be not enough to carry your entire business. Or do you look at, all right, I'm going to start scheduling everything far out and printing far in advance, but I don't know what numbers are going to be, so I'm going to have to be conservative. And now you're looking at permanent allocations, and what does that do to your relationship with retailers and with growing a readership, because no one can find your book, but at least it keeps your cash flow at least predictable. So like no great answers, and none of them are great solutions to the problem, but it's kind of something we're trying to wrap our heads around. If we start thinking, what if this goes beyond 2022, what do we really think we have to do? Interesting times.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, it's been an intense couple series of years, right? And at the same time, a bunch of us, like Scout, certainly, us, like, despite all this, we've actually grown in size quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So you also have the complexity of your business is just getting larger, which is the thing in and of itself.
You guys have found the great opportunities within this situation, where others, maybe more the bigger companies, have been harder to move, harder to pivot. You guys have pivoted very quickly. It's been great. It's been fun to watch, actually.
And with Bad Idea, you guys, I mean, maybe I'm wrong with the timeline. Didn't you kind of come out during the pandemic, pretty much? I mean, just before?
Yeah, we launched just this past March, so we're not even a year old.
Yeah,
so we're a pandemic baby.
Yeah. I remember seeing the ads for it before. Maybe that's why I'm thinking a longer time frame.
We pushed a year. We were meant to launch the April of the year before, right as the pandemic hit in March, and we saw the signs coming, so we pushed a year. But we have a different problem than you do, Josh, because with us, the retailers are not as big an issue. We have only about 200 stores that are in the Bad Idea Network that we've let in. And so it's very easy to make personal calls to all of them. And that's partly why we did it. But the fan base, they're ruthless with us because we poke them so much. And so anytime there's a paper shortage or an allocation or a delay, they don't really believe us. And so we've got to deal with that. I hope they're watching this. They can hear other publishers talk about the paper crisis.
It's a real thing.
That's so funny.
So really, this is just you guys. Everything with the paper shortage is Bad Idea's fault.
Yeah, this is just a bad. It's one of your gimmicks. It's just like, listen.
Thanks, I appreciate that. You make that difficult for all of us, but
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful?
No, but I remember something Charlie was saying earlier, and I was thinking about it specifically when I started seeing the first advertising for Bad Idea. And it's interesting that I think you said the ideas was there before the pandemic, but it's really starting to have to come up with more novel ways to approach bringing material to market, bringing it to retailers and to consumers, and pivoting to those ideas very quickly, because especially for independent publishers, it's going to require new ideas because things are changing very quickly, and there's no telling exactly what the new normal is going to be. And it seems like the only way to survive it is having an original, not just content, original content. Yeah, you always got to have great original content, but an original way, new ways to introduce it to the market.
Yeah, well, we've been very lucky. I think working at Valiant, doing superheroes, you're competing against Marvel and DC in a way that you're not if you're doing books like Boom or IDW or even Bad Idea Now. And so we have to look at the market in a different way. And I think it showed us that we need to figure out alternate distribution. We need to call our retailers so we can focus on them. All the kinds of things that now the pandemic is forcing everyone to look at. So we were just a second ahead. We were well poised in that regard. It was nice. It was lucky.
And the customer base is only becoming more and more savvy, right? They're only getting better and better at hunting down the thing that they want, and collecting the thing that they want. And so it does open up a lot of interesting avenues of how you can reach them that maybe 10 years ago when I first got started didn't really exist. So there's a lot of interesting ways. One thing that you had mentioned, Josh, was like the monthly model. And so something that we've talked about internally a little bit. There's a publisher called Wave Blue World. They've done some interesting things and tried different things. They did a thing where they released like a #1 issue, and then it went straight to trade after that. There was no #2.
Yeah.
And I don't know what their internal numbers look like, and I don't think we would ever do anything like that because I think we're still internally a little bit too old-fashioned to not want to have a #2 and a #3 and a #4 and so forth and so on. But I did really like the idea of, getting away from the every single month. This you're getting the new title, and we've talked about maybe stretching that out and making things a 2-month, or because we do so many mini series that are set in sets of 4 usually. What if it came out over the course of the year and it was a quarterly release, just to sort of start stretching some of these things out a little bit more. I mean, I don't know what ultimately we're going to move forward with or how, but that is something I think is cool. What stuff Bad Idea does and stuff Scout does and stuff Wave Blue World did is just try just a different way to release the books and see how the customer base and the retailers respond to it. Because I really believe if I go back to when I was first started and working for Gary Reed and on Caliber stuff, before I was doing anything on my own, I don't think any of those things would have been an option. I think it was very much this is exactly how you do this, and that's it. Even this idea that I was going to build this publisher out I was a punk band and we're going to go to every single show. We're going to go to 70 conventions a year, and I'm going to put paper in people's hands was will never work. You should just. I do think that now, probably because of somewhat the pandemic and people looking at things a different way, there is an opening that hasn't existed before to take this medium of comics, which is kind of a weird, because I'm in the game business, the comics business still seems so bizarrely strange, both cutting edge and new, and yet also super traditional. I'm no, this is how we do it. And I mean, where else is periodical paper publishing doing well? Like only comics, like nothing else is doing well in that world.
Well,
But I do think there's like some openings now where retailers and customers are seeing how they can get the product in a different way. And I don't necessarily know what that is, and we talk about it all the time. But I do think we're going to start seeing some like changes, and it will be a little bit different.
The key to all of that is always getting the retailers to buy in, right?
Yeah.
Because like we have actually done what we call nonstop for a while now for some of our titles. We do that for our Scoot Kids line, where the first issue is a 99-cent, basically just readers for any kid who's in the store. Hopefully that gets them interested, and then it comes out with the graphic novel that follows it. So, like one's an impulse buy, one is the whole story for the kids. Mm-hmm. And so we do that for the kids' Scoot line. But then we do also release some other books which are in the nonstop format, where we do a collectible first issue followed by the trade. Now, some retailers really like it. Some retailers don't like it. It's about explaining the concept to the retailers, and if they buy in, I think there's something that could work really well there, depending on the series. Because as we all know, issues don't always sustain themselves always over the course of the run of even of a mini series as much as you'd like them to.
Oh, so certainly.
If it's the right title, I think there's definitely room there. But with all these things, it's about getting the retailers to buy into the concept and not having them say, I'll just wait for the trade, and then having them not pick up the trade. So it's go back and forth on these things.
I think that that's another reason why we're interested in stretching it out a little bit. So how like traditional comics, a number one comes out, retailers are going to order what they're going to order whatever they're going to order. And then number two, and this was a thing, again, you go back 12, 13 years where I was like, well, we'll see, the thing like, well, your number two is going to be 50% of what your number one was. Mm-hmm. I mean, realistically, you can almost set your watch to that, mm-hmm. like, yep, that is how it's going to go. And the reason for that, of course, is that like if your retailer bought 6 of your number one, they haven't even gotten their number one on the shelf yet. They're looking to pre-order number two. They're like, well, I'll go half, and we'll see. And that just happens across the board. And so that's something that we've been looking at of like, with maybe doing a quarterly release of something, and this to see if that goes away a little bit more. If you can, I don't know, stretch out the lifetime of how long a retailer has to sell a book so that they can make a better, more educated decision on a number two, and then a number three, so forth and so on. But I don't know, it's some of those things. I didn't know you guys were also doing the, I love the idea of like the children's book for 99 cents. That's a really good one. And then get them to buy the trade.
I think what's also really interesting is like, for me, I come from a background where I first started in Kickstarter, with publishing comics. Before that, I was in animation, and I was working in feature film and things like that, and then came to comics and came back to publishing. But like in the Kickstarter base, your issue numbers go up. So you might sell 500 of the first issue. And if you do your campaign and people like it, they buy in, and all of a sudden you've got 800 people backing your next one. And then you're at like 1,500 for the third. And by the time, so the audience keeps growing. And the time between the issues might be 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. So I think there's something to definitely examine there. Why in that model? Because it's directly to consumers and people are identifying, people are willing to wait that long time and they stick with a series and the numbers go up, versus the direct market where they automatically go down. So, one builds a following and one loses a following. So how can we take that model from Kickstarter, where you're building with every single issue, and bring it to the direct market so the same thing happens?
And that was definitely something we were seeing even before the pandemic, where it used to be, more or less, it used to be the different channels, you could pretty much feed like the same product through the different channels, whether it's for, and this is sort of pre-Kickstarter, but what you were doing for direct market versus what you're doing for conventions and sort of a handful of other like direct to consumer like subscriptions was pretty much the same material. So you could have economies of scale would help you some. And now it's become, even before the pandemic, it's become more fractured. Kickstarter very much is looking for something like what you're talking about. They'll read their serial story that way, and they might read one issue a year, but once they find the one they want, they'll stick with it. Retail is still very much, it's still, despite what I hear sometimes, it's still more periodical based and is looking for monthly material to fill the shelves and to sort of find something that's going to draw readership. So it's shooting at a lot of things. For us, convention sales have moved very heavily towards straight to trade, and that tends to be where a lot of our trade interest is. It's become very difficult to get someone coming up to a table interested in an individual. It's always, well, do you have it collected? And a lot of those people, that might be, from what they tell me, that might be they're only shopping for comics. They're sort of avid comic readers, but they don't go into stores. Some of them may go to Kickstarter, or a lot of them might go to like Webtoons, but anything they're going to buy physical, they're just waiting. Like once a year, they go to their local convention, or they might drive to 2 or 3, and they're going to load up on. We have a couple of guys before the pandemic, and before we kind of stopped having conventions. I'd see them like clockwork in Houston, and they'd come in like, what are the new titles you published this year? And that would be the only time that they would buy Red 5 titles, but they buy anything new that we publish and in trade, and that they were like regular customers, but it was a totally different channel and in a different way. And so, but it also means I now have to consider more material for trade than maybe I was going to, because it's not just feeding like the book market, but I need to have it for the convention market. And conversely, a lot of material I might have printed for periodical, I might not be able to sell off like surplus copies through the convention market anymore. That's I'll probably end up sitting on them and sort of having to write that off, because that's very much for the direct market, and maybe doesn't have an outlet anywhere else. So we're looking at, and I've really I knew about the Scout program. I didn't know about the Ray Blue World one, but something like that. Okay, is there some way to bridge that gap to have a periodical, something for the periodical market and something for the trade market, and try to get like economies of scale back on our side? I still haven't found the perfect solution, but it's something that we're always kind of looking at and trying to figure out.
But I hate hearing that. It's horrifying to me. We had the same thing at Valiant, where I would see over and over again annual customers. They would come once a year to a convention, and they'd spend a bunch of money, and I just couldn't push them to the stores, the local stores. Across from me would be their local store set up at the show, and they wouldn't buy from there. And I was always worried that we weren't able to get them on the monthlies, which we have a nicer profit on. We'd have to carry inventory costs. We'd lose them if they got sick or didn't get a ticket for the next year. I think it's a problem that the whole industry has. I'm with you. I don't know how to solve it, but it's something.
And definitely the thing retailers want more than anything is for you to get that person into the store.
Yeah.
Right. Because otherwise you think about their business, their model, a lot of stores live and die based on their subscription, their subs. Like the people, the 80 people, the 180 people, depending on whatever it is, those people are going to come in, and most of them have most of them are going to come in and they're going to spend X. They're going to spend their 20, their 100, whatever it is, that number, that's what they're going to spend. And like, if I'm coming in, I'm like, here's this new book, and what I'm doing is trying to take an existing customer that they have that's already buying Avengers that they're already getting, and they like that's their $4, and I'm like, no, don't buy Avengers, buy this thing for $4. Like, that's not appealing to the retailer. Like, I'm offering them a pain in the ass. I'm like, here's an extra pain in your ass. Here's a book you don't know, and now you're gonna have to order it again, and all this other business. And so like it's not super appealing. Like one of the things we talk about at least once a month, when I get Josh together and the team, and is how do we drive people into stores? I mean, especially when we're first starting out, we'd hear all the time like, yeah, we have a handful of people who come in and ask when we order for subs, and then the next thing is like, how do we get on the shelf? Like, how do I get on your wall? I want to be on the wall. We need to be able to get those pickup copies, and we did start to get there eventually, but it is hard, and you get into these things. The Kickstarter's awesome, and we definitely utilize it. I mean, particularly with tabletop gaming, it's almost hard to really launch a tabletop game and have it be a major title without a major Kickstarter at this point. Like, it's so ingrained in that culture. Comics, you certainly don't need to, but we do some from time to time if we want to do a special edition or we want to do a hardcover of a bigger book and things like that. But you have like those customers that like to buy on that platform, and then you have the convention people, because we have the same thing. Probably we probably have more than average because we've been so active on conventions for so long, you know, and that's where they go. It's driving new people to go into a comic book store is a tough one. And it's funny because that's exactly what the retailers want. Like, the retailers don't want to hear that, like, yeah, I've got 100 people that show up at Boston Comic Con and buy every new book we have, but they won't go to that extra show. You know?
Often
they
know
won't
them.
go to the retailer.
Often they're old customers from the store, and they can't figure out how to get them back as well.
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the things that's nice about Kickstarter, you know, if there's a way that publishers can incorporate this more, is it gives the reader a connection to the creator, right? You know, it's a direct connection that they might not get unless they were at a signing where they got to say hello to that creator for a second. Mm-hmm. But for the course of the campaign, there's a newsletter, they're getting feedback, they can comment, the creator can respond. And maybe there's some kind of more real-time access that we as publishers can give, you know, consumers to creators. And I know that's always a dicey thing because some people are good at promoting their books, some people are not. But maybe like there's some space there that, you know, can be used where, you know, that the creator has more contact with the people buying the books. And I think the more that you can do that and make it a personal connection, the better the book is going to do, and the more loyal the fan base will be.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, me too. I mean, that's the main thing with Kickstarter comics, are that people feel like they don't feel like they're a customer. They feel like they're a part of the process, you know, and sometimes that's not that. Sometimes that's hard to deal with, but you know, that is how you build loyalty. And I think that is that phenomena, I guess, is that's why in Kickstarter you see campaigns grow as the series gets older, and why people don't care that it's 5 or 6 months in between issue 1 and issue 2, you know, whereas in the direct market, it's the exact opposite of that. I think it's because, you know, what you're saying, Charlie, is that people, you know, it's not so much about the thing that they're supporting, it's that they like feel like I've got this creator's back, I'm with this guy, you know, and they like that. They like to feel like they're more than a customer.
Yeah, very much so. It seems, and it's been good. What I've seen has been kind of good for creators, but also a new challenge, because you also see the creator has the ability now to go direct to customer, probably easier than even during the self-publishing boom, without even necessarily having to go to the retailers now. And I see a lot of them, and there's a lot of good books, and we'll talk to them, and they'll say, no, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I've got it worked out. I've got a pretty good fan base. I don't necessarily need a publisher. And he's right. They don't necessarily need publishers. And so it fractures the marketplace even more. So it's like I can't fault them for it, because they I want to see a good book succeed. But it also is like, all right, how do we go with that when some of the best books can work just fine going direct to consumers and without having to deal with any of the older model stuff? And definitely publishers and retailers are kind of in the old model. And what is that going to mean for our business, 10 years from now or 15 years from now? I don't know yet.
I do think there is something to be said for that. It's different markets, right? Yep. And you can always say to a Kickstarter creator, yes, go do your Kickstarters and make as much money as you can, but there's a whole nother audience that you're not touching. And, it's the same kind of internal discussion that we have at Scout. Whatever they did in Kickstarter, for the most part, is not going to affect the direct market numbers, because, it's completely different audiences. So you can say to them, do your thing. We can also put you out in a different space for a different audience. And, if you're already at zero, if you've made back your cost, if you've made your money, as a creator, you're in a good position to have a conversation with a publisher to see who can best support your vision and introduce you to as many more people as possible.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we've been up and down the road and done this many times. And I mean, professionally, before I was ever in comics, I was an analytical research chemist. So I'm like a super data oriented person.
Awesome.
Like somebody running a Kickstarter, unless that Kickstarter, I don't know how big it would have to be, but I've never seen one where like, oh, you had a super successful Kickstarter and now suddenly like that book takes a crap in the direct market. It just doesn't work that way. If you have a big footprint, you have a big footprint, and that's really all that matters. I think that those audiences are so like so different from each other that there is not really any cannibalizing that happens. So we actually offer like a kind of a service to a lot of the creators we have who have built their own audience, and they don't want to give up that Kickstarter. They don't want to give that up. That's how they want to do their books. We're like, cool, great, man. Here's what we'll do. Like, you run your Kickstarter, you do everything you want, and then I kind of take in all the information they have, and we'll be like, all right, you raised this much money, here's a check. That's what you made. And then we handle everything else from like production all the way through fulfillment. They don't touch it again. You know, like every single part of it's done. So, I mean, there's like, we never feel like, I don't know. I mean, I suppose like sometimes there's books that we publish where I would never consider taking it to Kickstarter because I feel like they wouldn't do well maybe, or they don't fit the model what we want to do, or the creator doesn't want to do it. It does take a certain type of creator to really do one well.
Yeah. Well, look at the biggest Kickstarter book of all time, right? Berserker.
Yeah,
it seemed to do okay in the direct market too, right?
It did. I mean, it did suffer from quite a bit of attrition.
I mean, like what? I mean, at most, I think there were like 3,000 people who backed it on Kickstarter. Isn't that what it was?
Yep.
So when you take like 3,000 compared to the 60 to 70 to 80,000 people who picked it up in the direct market, it's still just.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the only thing that they did. Like, to talk about that one in particular, I think that their Kickstarter was great, and I think that the way they kind of rolled it out into the direct market was great. I think that they ended up with a sort of like bizarrely overly inflated number one, right? Because there were so many variants that came out. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, my local store has probably like 1,000 copies of Berserker #1 that you could go in and buy, because they ended up getting the 1 in 1,000, thing, and a bunch of others. They ordered something like 2,500 books. You're never going to sell 2,500 books. They know that going in, but they're gaming on like, well, I'm going to be able to sell this one for $800 and this one and this one and this one. They're going to get on Facebook Live. They're going to get on whatnot. They're going to do whatever they're going to do, and they're going to sell these variants.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's profitable, but they have 1,000 copies.
Yeah, but they have this massive backstock, and kind of like what. I mean, I don't know internally, and I'm sure that Boom thinks it's awesome, and I think it's awesome too. But like the drop from #1 to #2, at least what was the public numbers at the time, it was a pretty hefty drop, because as soon as you lose that, like, well, everybody's got to get the
all the variants
they did.
As soon as you're not labeling all the variant, right? And it's more like what's the actual series doing?
Yeah, and then when it settles into like, this is how many readers you have. Like, granted, you still have 60 or 70,000 readers, and I would take that all day long. No problem whatsoever. But it was really interesting how like massive the drop off was from that initial like frenzy.
But my greater point was even something that high profile still was able to be on Kickstarter, right?
Absolutely.
No, I definitely agree that I have not seen any cannibalization between the two. It's been more like Berserker. It's good that they went with Boom, and it was really good for Boom. They went with Boom and moved to the direct market, but they could have looked at those numbers and gone like, we don't need you guys. Now they know better, but they could have been like, no, we can keep doing a bunch of these and do it fine. And it feels like more and more. It's probably more feeling than truth. I probably should track the numbers of responses back, but it does feel like more and more of guys that I approach. They're like, I like being my own guy and doing my own thing, and I don't want to get bogged down with something else. Now, that being said, I do seem to meet just as many on the other side of I am so tired of doing Kickstarters. Or at least of handling all of the operational part of it. I'm going to keep doing them, but if you can take over all of that for me, you have got a deal, because I don't want to fulfill another box for the rest of my life. And we're like, done, deal. We can do that. That's what we're here for. And that's that feeling. Yeah. And it's becoming a different part of the operation where we're publishing almost we're still primarily publishing for the direct market, but you start to publish for the fulfillment market too, and that's becoming a part of the new publisher scheme as much as anything else.
Yeah, fulfillment publishing is a big business. We do a lot of it.
And I apologize. I have to leave just slightly early because I had after they asked me this, I already had a family commitment. I thought Kyle. Yeah, there's Kyle. I will happily turn over to Kyle for anything that we haven't
taking notes.
was great to talk to you guys, and
Hey,
hopefully
Joshua.
see you at
Thanks,
Hey, Josh.
in person one of these days.
All right. So I have.
Thank God he's gone, right?
He and I talked the other day about the book market for almost 3/4 of a show, because that's the new direction. One of the new directions that he's taking Red 5 is to that direct book market. Because, he's like, I have properties that we don't have art for, like stories that come in. Why don't we turn them into a prose book and put them in the book market? Oh yeah, and so that leads me to the next question I was going to ask you fellas, and Dinesh, you guys at Bad Idea, and then even when you were at Valiant, I can remember sitting at Retailer Summit, and you guys would come around with Valiant, and it's, hey, we've got a game. I seem to remember a game,
A mobile game,
a video game, huh?
Yeah, we did a mobile game to promote a crossover.
Right. That was my first Retailer Summit. I went, oh man, this is gonna be great. I was so green. But what are some different directions you guys see your own individual businesses going, but the entirety of the industry going forward? Is there writing on the wall that you can see?
I mean, Charlie and Travis, you guys should go first. I think we're Bad Idea is not quite swimming the same way. So my answer, I don't think, will be as effective.
So
or informative.
I think a major thing that's like, if you look at like the entertainment industry as a whole, I think that you've seen a lot of the medium large companies have been bought up and are being further and further agglomerated into a handful of giants. And I think what that's done is it's created space above our heads for us to grow into. So, for us, I think that, we like to think of ourselves as sort of like, well, anything that we're going to do, we want to do it as in-house as much as possible. Right. So, when it comes to like animation, we've invested in an animation studio that we're partners with. When it comes to game development, we own part of a development studio that is working on apps, games, and video games. We've like taken stakes in these things of our own to develop our own. And a big part of that was what we've just seen over the past 3 years with, like, we own a tabletop gaming publisher, we own a comic book publisher, and being able to say like, oh, okay, so your comic is this, well, now it's going to be a tabletop game. And the amount of royalty that you could potentially earn from that makes this look silly, So just being able to do that kind of moving around was like, well, this is going to be valuable, and we want to control that. So, I mean, for me, like, if I found a VC guy who was particularly crazy, I'd be like, hey, I want to build my own movie studio, and I would be like, I want to make my own stuff entirely. Like, I think that there's space above our heads for companies like us, like Scout, like some of the other smaller sized companies that are agile and nimble and are used to making their own stuff. Like, I mean, we have a workshop in our building that has 3D printers and all those things. If we decide one day, like, hey, I want to make 25 bobbleheads, that, we can make 25 bobbleheads right there. We can do all that in house. So I think for us, that's kind of where we're at, is we want to grow into that space that's been kind of emptied out, and be the like a miniaturized Disney, I guess, where you're more genre fiction, but you kind of are able to control and make choices about the IP that you're working with and that you're publishing across the board, from the cradle to the grave on that, like all the way through from, what it is. I mean, that's kind of how we look at stuff.
So I'm going to have a completely self-serving sounding answer in saying that I think that the biggest change that's coming is that comic book shops have built their bread and butter on big two titles for a long time. And I think the future is outside the big two. because Marvel and DC are making such attractive alternate versions for consuming their products. There's a lot of, if you're young today, you don't want to read Marvel comics. You want to watch the Marvel movies. You want, and you want to watch Robert Downey Jr. Or you want to see this next iteration. The same thing with DC and on HBO.
I mean,
Max,
I'm old and I feel that way.
Right, but you start going there. So I think, shops that are completely centered on, the 90% of their business is from those big two companies will need to probably shift some of that if they want to start getting the audience of the future. And I see that here in Los Angeles. The shops that I see doing better are the ones that embrace everyone versus the ones that are just, the way it's been done for 30 years. So I think, like, for me, when I look at the writing on the wall, when you're talking about where are things moving, I think, just like taking Scout off the table, like, it's Boom, it's Image, it's, it's these other companies that are bringing in, Source Point Press, whatever it is, it's these other voices and these other stories that I think are going to track the next generation of readers.
I totally agree with that. We've tried to narrow down our retailer base to just the stores that figure that out, because there are many stores that figure it out, but there's so many that are, maybe they figured out they don't even want it. They're trying to push back against it, and it's just not worth the resources from our end, all the publishers' end, to try and convince them. But I totally agree, actually.
Something else I wanted to bring up, and this was something that really ingratiated me to all three of your companies as I was leaving the retail space, right? So I closed my retail store at the beginning of the pandemic, because when you make a bad real estate deal, you make a bad real estate deal. Sometimes that happens. But all of you, in your own ways, were giving back to retailers for their support, and we're helping them get through the pandemic. What have you seen has come from that? Has there been a very specific response from retailers in terms of support? Did that pay off for you? And then going forward, what are some ways that in less pandemic-y situations, retailers and other publishers could start to look at kind of ways to raise the tide for everyone? Was that too oblique of a question?
I mean, like, I'll quickly say that we had a program during the pandemic where if the store was closed and they ordered something from the Scout website and their customer put their store's name in, we gave the store 50% of that. Basically just like they had ordered our book at their store.
We did a similar thing.
In terms of how it worked, I think it's indicative of life. Some people are appreciative. Some people are not appreciative. And I don't really think, like the pandemic specifically, I think it may have ingratiated us to some stores, but for some stores, the amount of money that was not enough to move the needle, because as much as I would like to think that was millions of dollars coming back to their store that we were giving them, it wasn't. But I think, like that the gesture made sense. One of the things that I found the most fulfilling for me as a publisher is making those retailer calls and talking with different shops about what's working in their store and what's not. And I think the more conversations that we can have like that one-on-one, the better it is, because, you start to establish a relationship. And there are, stores that I have a really good relationship with the owners, and I think, like, as you were saying, Dinesh, like there are stores that get you, right? And there are stores that get me personally, and I have a personal connection to. And I think in any business, when you have a personal connection, you do better.
Yeah.
But it's making that personal connection that's sometimes difficult, because maybe your books don't sell in their store, or they don't have the capital to take on that risk and a chance. And so then it's just about your personal connection. Is that enough to help them? But I think communication is always what it comes down to.
Yeah. Time and communication. Yeah. We did a campaign. We pushed a year. So we took our marketing budget for the year and we just sent checks to stores. We don't have that many stores in our network, so it was easy for us to do. In terms of did it pay off, I think they've put up with our shit since, which in a way they probably wouldn't have. And what's been great is, the reason we did it is I've been in the comic business now for a long time, and stores are the everyone says it, but it's true. Stores are the lifeblood. there was a moment where the entire industry looked at it and said, are we going to have half our stores go out of business and then therefore have no business?
Right.
What we've seen is the opposite. I think as well as publishers have done, stores have done even better. They found their Instagram live events. They found their direct to consumer. They've pulled out back issues that have gone up in value now, so they're doing very well. But I think they remember all of us being there for them when it wasn't clear what was going to happen. And I think perhaps what will happen is when we as a publishing industry on the publisher side have a moment of crisis, I think there'll be stores that'll step up because of the efforts of publishers like us.
Yeah, I think there's so many stores that will, that actually have had great years and have grown and gotten bigger. And it's almost always the store owners that were like, that I would say were the most savvy and like the most like we're trying to create an experience to go to their store, and they were the most open to being like, yeah, my store needs to be the place where it's hard to find, you get hard to find stuff. I think a lot of stores are doing really, really well right now. We did a similar thing to what Charlie did. We did if you ordered a book from our website and put it in your store, we would send 50% of that purchase cost to the retailer. We did like retailer care packages and things like that. But a big part of that honestly was just that we were trying to get stuff out of our warehouse. We were trying to make room to continue being able to like keep mainly the games e-commerce business going. But I think at this point right now, I feel like we probably have somewhere between 200, maybe 300 stores that are like ride or die, and they buy almost the entire line every single month. And hopefully they're doing well with them. But I feel like that we're somewhere in that range of like 200 or 300 stores that are like, I mean, I know a good number because they order direct. But I think it's something around there. Like they're just buy everything, like sight unseen. They're like happy to do it, happy to support, and are doing well. And that's great. And I still think all the rest of the direct market stores, which you hear different numbers all the time, but let's call it 2,000 of them, so another 1,500, 1,600, 1,700 of them, I think it's still very much like when we have a hot book that they've heard of that, they think is going to hit, that those numbers go up. But they certainly don't like carry our line, or maybe they carry 2 or 3 of our books are on their shelves and then the rest are subs only. I still think that we're not quite to that point where we're able to earn the majority of stores enough of margin to where they're, taking a chance on our entire line, or I think carrying our trades. So like our direct market with trades is not super strong. But, in 2019, we started doing outputting through Simon & Schuster. And some companies went to Random House and different things. And that actually has grown a lot faster than I thought it would. So we've kind of made up for that now. I mean, there was a kind of a ramp up period, but that sort of made up for it. So now I have, I don't know. It's really interesting because now trades are moving, but now they're moving into like Books A Million and Barnes & Noble and Half Off Books, which is interesting because these are now customers that they don't care about issue 1 or 2 and 3 and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know. I think I got a little rambly there too, Kyle.
Well, so Sean Butler made a comment here that he agrees and he thinks his LCS is one of the stores we're talking about that get it. And he shops with Jen King, who I think we all probably would agree is, she gets it.
Awesome.
Yeah, one of the best, if not the
hell,
best.
I wouldn't have a job if Jen King didn't call me and be like, hey, you should really quit that job at that binder factory and come do this thing, start this broadcast network about comics. Okay, yeah, I'm down. But my experience is that to get my Bad Idea books, I had to have a pull list at one store. To get my Scout comics, I have a pull list at another store. And to get my Source Point books, I order them directly from the store where they used to have the warehouse in the back of the store. Like, I get my Source Point books from Koi's Comics,
Boys,
which is where I met Source Point to begin with. So
that's way back in the day.
Yeah, there are. I think the consumer is figuring out how to. At least I hope they're all as smart as I am. If they're not, that's a problem. But find their books and get their books, right?
Yeah.
And the length to which you have to go is almost secondary to getting the product you're seeking. For instance, I would get one shipment from Jen a month, and it would have all my Bad Idea books in it, and that would be all I'd get. Or with I'm trying to think of which one was it. ENIAC. I didn't get it until all the issues were out. Just the way we shipped it. So I'm still getting the books, but I'm getting like a trade. My stuff with Koi's, it's how often can I drive to Saginaw and pick them up? My Scout books is at my regular traditional LCS that I go to. So if you guys as publishers could say one thing to the consumer about what you're game planning for in the future, and I'm not asking you to give away anything that's not, any of that kind of stuff, but if you could, hey, wink and a nod, just be prepared, what would you tell the consumer?
Ooh.
I see the look, Charlie. I've written too big of a question again, haven't I?
No, I mean,
Charlie's gonna get in trouble. That's what that look is.
That's
well,
the ink hasn't signed. I mean, it hasn't dried on the contracts yet. No, I think there's. I think it's difficult to have that. Do we have exciting things coming in the pipeline? For sure. For me, the more important thing is I want customers to get to know our line as an entirety and know that we're doing lots of different types of books. We have our Black Caravan horror imprint. We have our Scoot Younger Readers line. We have the General Scout book, but also that we're accessible. We try to be a company that's accessible. I'm very accessible on Twitter. I respond to people. I try to, shout out stores all the time. I try to put people in contact with good stores. If you can't find Scout books, let me know on Twitter. I'll tell you what store near you is carrying Scout books, because we want to, build that relationship with the customers. So I'm hoping, this year going forward, we have an even better relationship with customers and with creators. So I would say, for me, those are the two buckets I would love to fill: a better relationship with stores and a better relationship with customers and creators as well.
That's a tough question, Kyle.
Okay.
With what? I mean, the easy answer is always if you want the product, then go to your store and ask for it.
You mean, Travis, in terms of it being 3 different stores for Kyle?
Well, just the idea of what do you want it to? What would you tell a consumer? What would you tell a consumer?
I guess in my mind, when I wrote this question, what I was saying is 2022 as a year is going to look different than any other year ever. And because just that's how every year goes. But this year is going to look particularly strange. Is the message from y'all, be patient, we're working on it? Is the message from y'all, we're working with, like Charlie said, we're working with trying to grow with retailers, trying to grow with, get more name recognition? What is the message? Is it?
Yeah, I think the message is mainly go out there and find the stuff that you're a fan of, and explore stuff. Retailers want new customers to come into their store, and they want them to hang out. And most retailers are trying to make, their stores an experience, experiential shopping. Go out there and find those things. And yeah, for the next few months, books and products and different things are going to be late. But one of the things Charlie talked about is they looked at well, what do we have to sell right now? You have backstock, you have all these things. I guarantee that the vast majority of comic readers are not even aware of a bunch of that stuff. For us too, and everybody. Go out and find the thing that you're a fan of. Be a fan of that. I would just say that. for me, I look at things like very much I almost don't, as long as if somebody, so I look at myself and I'm like, I'm not competing with Marvel and DC really. Like we sort of try not to even think about that. We try to think about like, how do I get a new person to come in and buy those books, or a new person to read something different? So that's why I'm thrilled to see Boom do a giant Kickstarter and have a book sell 600,000 units. I'm thrilled to see Bad Ideas do some weird thing that gets the speculators market all bent in a shape and pissed off. I like all that stuff. Like anything that is different and weird and brings attention onto the industry and is telling people like, hey, there's a bunch of weird stuff that still happens in this crazy little strange corner of the publishing book world, and you should be a part of it and get into it. I'm into that. That's what I want to see. Like I love the Marvel movies for that reason, because a bunch of people who aren't into that stuff, they go see a Marvel movie, but they're not going to go and buy Captain America comics. But they'll show up to one of these weird stores and they might buy one of my weird comics. So
it's such a healthy attitude, man. That is such a healthy attitude. It's so rare for people.
Yeah, I mean,
our business
I think a lot of the smaller and mid-sized publishers feel that way. I think they look at it in terms of like, I'm like, I don't care about fighting for, tenths of a percentage of market share of the 1.2 million weekly comic buyers in the United States. I don't care about that at all. Like I want that market to turn into like 3.2 million people, and I'll keep my plain old 1% market share of that number, and it'll just be bigger all the way around. Like that's how we focus on things. That's how we talk about things internally. And I think that, for consumers, be a fan. Go find stuff you're a fan of. And yeah, it's going to be a weird year, and it's going to be tough on shipping and tough on printing. But there's so much stuff. There's so much stuff that you missed last year, and there's so much stuff that you missed the year before. Like, go find it. It's out there.
I also think it's an important thing to remember that there are Source Point Press fans, right? Like, that. You guys have some diehards. There are plenty of Bad Idea diehards. There are Scout diehards. There are Dynamite diehards. Whatever the company is, there are the diehards for that company. And by a store not stocking or only stocking to pull, they're missing out on that potential reader base who walks into a shop and says, do you guys carry Dynamite, or do you carry, Source Point Press? And like, well, it's on pull. Well, that, that's an extra step, and it's so hard to get a new customer to get on pull. So at least like getting 1 or 2 copies of a selection of a company's books, I think is probably worth having in your store.
I think that's great. That's great advice. I don't think I've answered your question, Kyle. Hard for Bad Idea to answer. We're over right now, and we spent the last couple months selling Invisible Comics and Rocks. So I suppose our 2022 is, if you were annoyed with Bad Idea last year, it's really going to suck this year. But if you liked it, it's going to be even wackier.
Some of my favorite things have happened this year in comics, and all 3 of you have to do with this. So one of the cool things is I've developed a relationship with Charlie where I get to talk every week to a creator from Scout, even if it's just to book them to talk to Jen King. Awesome. But that's introducing me to a creator whose career I now want to follow. Dinesh, not so much with you particularly, but with Adam Freeman and the text messages with Adam and the conversation with Adam about, okay, so the death threats, because he and I have a similar view on marketing, I think, of awesome. The crazier you can be, the better.
Yeah.
And then Travis, to see a company that I've literally followed since it was the back room of a comic shop do a Kickstarter that sold out on Amazon and was the #1 book on Amazon, and be the first graphic novel marketed on cable television in prime time.
Yeah, that was pretty wild.
That was amazing. I didn't know that. It's amazing.
Yeah, I remember when
they did it. Yeah, they did it on. They did commercials on like TNT because it was with AEW. It was the Tony Schiavone. He's the announcer and like a executive vice president of AEW, the wrestling promotion.
That's awesome.
It was awesome, and that was an entirely done as like a, that was very cool. It was very, very cool. The only thing that would have made that cooler is if those books had showed up anything close to on time. That would have really improved it.
I'm not going to point out that I have a copy right here, but I don't have my hardcover.
Yeah, I mean, we did get some copies because we had, like, Tony had so many. So we put them on an airplane. Like, those copies really cost a lot of money to get here. We flew them in.
Yeah, that was
awesome, and that was awesome of Tony Khan and AEW guys to do all that stuff. It was almost unbelievable that it even happened.
The end of that statement is that I want to thank you guys specifically for one of the best years I've had in comics, and it's my first year in comics where I haven't been a retailer, which has been super cool to be in this a kind of a different way. So let's take the last couple minutes. We've already run a little long. I don't want to take any more of your time than because I know everybody has stuff. If there is something you want to promote, or there's someplace somebody should be looking to find out what's coming, where is it? What is it? Tell them where to go.
I want to know what this book is, Travis. You didn't name it. You did a very bad job of plugging the book.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I'm probably the worst person to do this. The book I'm talking about is Butts and Seats, the Tony Schiavone story. Yeah, that one right there. That Kyle.
The copies aren't available right now. They're still being shipped over?
Yeah, there's a handful of copies out there in the world. I think we got, I don't know, maybe 8 cases on a plane here to cover a couple of signings that we had. But yeah, it was supposed to release right before Thanksgiving, and they may even be at the warehouse. They may have arrived like Friday or Thursday.
Cool.
But any time they're supposed to finally be here. But yeah, we did really, really well in that book. The orders, Amazon and the traditional bookstore market it was pretty amazing. And, you know, being on a TV show that gets, you know, I mean, 1 million viewers or whatever it is.
It won the night the commercial dropped. It was most
pretty bonkers. And like, you'd see, like, especially with Amazon orders, you'd see them like spike, you know, like that next 24 hours. It was we had never experienced anything like that before. So it was pretty cool. But I think like, main things like big 2022 stuff. So, you know, we work with, again, in tabletop gaming, we work with a lot of the bigger game publishers to do their publishing. So like I just started doing some stuff with Gloomhaven again. It's kind of like the last thing that I still write is the Gloomhaven comics that we do. So there will be some more of those coming out this year.
Cool.
And then, you know, we're doing a line of comics that are based on some of the more popular games that Asmodee has. So that'd be like Pandemic, which is the, you know, highest selling tabletop hobby game of all time. Legends of the Five Rings is another one. Mysterium is one. So those will all be coming out in 2022. And we're excited about that. We want a big part of the reason that we're excited about that, and not to take up a ton of time and not to get too much into the weeds, but we did this big experiment last year where we started tracking when people came to our web store, because the web stores all got connected, so you could get comics and games and everything all in one place. And we started tracking like how many people put in different products, like across different branding. And we found that like 13% of people who show up to buy a game, if we make it so that they show them a comic, they'll throw that into their cart too. And so we thought that was really cool. Like that's not a negligible number of people that are willing to make that crossover. And, you know, you look at comics as a whole, like across the world, and you kind of have to cut out, you know, if you look at just the direct market, I think you're talking around about a $1.5 billion business. Well, tabletop gaming is like $80 billion business. You know, like there's a ton of customers. In the United States alone, there's over 4,000 gaming stores that don't sell comic books at all, right? So just with that, that's 4,000 retail outlets that are kind of appealing to a pop culture audience that are not showing comic books to people. So for us, doing Pandemic, doing Legend of the Five Rings, doing Mysterium, doing some of those things is about, again, it's about trying to grow the market. And it's about trying to get people who aren't reading a comic to be like, oh, there's a comic of something I know that I already like. You know, if we can be the thing that starts them into that, awesome. So keep an eye on that. That's something that we're we're very into, we're heavily invested in, and we're going to make a big push for that this year.
You know, I would say, like, in terms of your first part of your question, the easiest way for people to follow us is, you know, we've been gotten a lot more active on social media this last year. So we even have a TikTok channel. But, you know, you could follow. Yeah, Scout has a TikTok. It's kind of crazy. You know, so follow whatever your favorite social is. If you like Instagram, if you like Facebook, if you like Twitter, follow Scout Comics on there. We're going to be dropping a lot of things soon. We're trying to make our announcements actionable. I always think that's good if you can make your announcement about something actionable where someone can order the book when they see it announced. So I can't make any announcements today, but we're going to have one in a couple of weeks about some books that will be coming out this year. We've got some really great creators that we're working with this year. And I think in 2022, that's the year where Scout pairs some more established names in the comic industry with some of the rising creators that we've been championing before. And hopefully, you know, like, those audiences will come together. But we're really excited about some of the names we're getting to work with this year in 2022. And I'm looking forward to announcing that.
Awesome. Bad idea. Bad idea is over. So there's not a lot to say. We're not publishing anymore. We're kind of out of business. We do have an announcement coming up that I think will explain to people a little more of why we did things the way we did. Probably will make people that hate us really be like, I told you they were evil. And people that like us be like, I knew that the whole time. So why are you telling me now? I don't know. It's the best I can do.
Where can people find that announcement? Where will they be able to find that announcement? Is it on social media?
New York Times. New York Times is doing it for us.
Okay. Well, to find out the best thing about the bad idea, read the New York Times. So when we launched the experience,
I like it when you say it better.
So when we launched the experience a year ago last weekend, they did a New York Times piece about it. They spelled my last name wrong.
Oh no.
And I had friends go, you should really reach out and get that corrected. I'm like, that's how you get on a list. I don't want to be on the New York Times' bad side because
no, you should do it. You should do it. They have a whole system, and you'll get a correction. You'll be in the New York Times twice. You should do it.
I should have a year ago, but I was scared. So, all right,
I don't know
guys.
If there's a statute of limitations on that, Kyle. The Times is the one.
I'll reach out to George. That's true. I appreciate that. But it was just funny. It's like this last year, it really has been the best year of my comics career, and I really do appreciate the fans that have been with us, and you guys who have been supportive of us. We've done stuff with all of you this year. It's been super fun. Yeah. And you know, we're kicking off the rest of the second year like tomorrow and tonight. And I really just appreciate you guys being here and offering your insight to our fans and to our viewers. And it's, you know, I'm going to get all thappy and emotional just because I'm so glad I get to be a part of this industry. And the last 3 hours have really, you know, I talked to Fabrice,
that was a good interview. I saw that.
Yeah, I talked to Fabrice last hour, and he was talking about fighting to stay in the industry and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And so just thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching. I'm going to wrap up and let these guys go on with their day. And I'm going to sleep 9 days into this convention for like a half hour before our next panel, which is Mog Park and Envu, where they're going to be doing draw and bid. They'll be drawing live. You'll have a chance to pick it up. And then the EXP dance party with DJ Taji Beats, a.k.a. Brainy Singh of Enjoy Games and Comics. Yeah, Brainy's spinning live on our Twitch channel at 10 o'clock tonight.
Awesome.
So make sure you check that out. And we'll be back tomorrow. I'm with a bunch of great creators: Afua Richardson, Austin Janowski, Arvell Jones, David Pepos, and Dan Wickline. So we will see everybody tomorrow. Thank you, Dinesh. Thanks, you, Charlie. Guys. Thank you, Travis.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, guys.
We'll see everybody very, very soon. Be safe, be healthy. We'll see you soon.